Good evening. My name's Deborah Fang. I'm the city manager of Cupertino. Today we are not taking any phone calls for questions to prevent Zoom bombing or any other deliberate disruptions of our community event here. We will be taking questions in two ways. You can post your questions on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can email your questions to pio@cupertino.org. So in Cupertino's efforts in supporting the Black community and calls from the public to look into use of force and general law enforcement policies, we're here to have a public forum to have that discussion, the first in a series, and we're planning for a second that's going to be more focused on students and teens in early July. More information will be coming soon on that one. And now I would like to hand it over to our mayor, Mayor Stephen Scharf.
Hi, thanks to everyone for participating tonight. The murders of George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, as well as other killings of Blacks by police in the US have brought fresh attention to the situation faced by Black citizens in the United States. While these killings were the catalyst for the protests we've seen over the past few weeks, the root causes go a lot deeper. Racism, lack of economic opportunity, distribution of wealth, and job discrimination all feed into the anger that we've witnessed. While fortunately we haven't experienced any police-involved shootings in Cupertino for many decades, we have experienced racist incidents against Blacks in our city, and I'm sure that those will come up in the questions tonight. I'd like to thank our sheriff's captain for continuing to engage with the community. Thank you.
Yeah. And now I'd like to introduce Captain Rich Urena of the Sheriff's Department, West Valley Sheriff's Department. And I'm going to hand it over to him. He's going to be providing a little context, and then we'll be here to answer any questions.
Well, good evening, Mayor Scharf, City Manager Fang, and all the residents of the city of Cupertino. First of all, thank you very much for allowing me to be here today to talk about, I think, a very important topic, and that is, with everything that's happening around us, how do we move forward? So I'll start off with saying that what happened to Mr. George Floyd was a crime. I really don't know how else to put that. That was a crime. And every member of our community sees that as a crime. Whether you're a police officer, whether you're a resident, that was a crime. I just want to make that clear. And in doing so, I also want to say that we stand in solidarity with the intent of the movement we're seeing nationwide, actually worldwide. And what we want to do is really look at how we can improve our services, our policing services. And so before we get into this conversation, I do want to bring a little context. As many of you know, the Sheriff's Office is a very large organization. We have over 2,000 employees. And so this can be a very long conversation, right? So for purposes of our discussion, we're going to try to focus on patrol, the West Valley Patrol Division, which is the division that provides services to the city of Cupertino. And so the organization as a whole has 4 major bureaus. We have the Administrative Bureau, we have the Enforcement Bureau, we have the Custody Bureau, and then we have our Support Services Bureau. And so the Enforcement Bureau, that's the patrol, that's the special operations, investigations, and that's kind of the area we're going to focus on. And as I said, it is a large organization, but we're going to simply talk about how we police the city of Cupertino, our relationship that we've had over the last, well, since I believe 1955 or 56 when the city was incorporated. We've been here ever since then. As a matter of fact, we were here before that. And so with that context, my goal here today is to answer any questions that I can, to paint the picture in terms of what we have done in the last couple of decades, really, to improve transparency, to improve public trust, and to really paint the picture in terms of how we are changing and evolving. And so with that background, I will start with the first couple of questions that I've received, if you don't mind. The first question, and this was emailed. First question comes from a resident, Albert is a resident. He says, I'm a U.S. citizen immigrant from Hong Kong to California since 1969. Recently, I was verbally assaulted at Home Depot in Cupertino by two men, possibly because of the COVID-19 mess we are in. At this incident, I tried hard to keep my cool and just walk away. I feel this kind of misbehavior is getting much worse, and I don't know how I would respond the next time. All I know is that I may not be able to just walk away. I would like our sheriff department to detail what the proper response should be. Again, this is from Albert. Unfortunately, we have seen a few incidents in the city of Cupertino where people are using racist remarks. This particular incident here, I can tell you that unfortunately the Home Depot is in the city of San Jose, so we didn't respond to this incident. But the way to handle these incidents is what you did here, and that is we have to separate ourselves from people that want to do us harm. I can't stress that enough. The first thing you want to do is walk away like you did. If you're inside a store, contact an employee, okay? Get somebody to help you. These are very emotional events. And so what we want to do is create that distance, seek some assistance from someone, and then call your local police department, call the sheriff's office. We have many, many deputies that are trained in de-escalation techniques. So we'll get into that a little bit here later, but the point here is what you want to do is create that distance. Do not engage someone that clearly doesn't understand how to communicate. Seek some assistance. Our recommendation is an employee. However, you can certainly ask any other customer in the business to help. Have them call 911 while you're creating that distance, making sure that you're not assaulted. Again, that was from Albert. Second email we received is from Lee. Lee, this question is, my particular interest is in learning about what we are doing to eliminate racial profiling in law enforcement. With the primary example of young drivers of color, young male drivers of color are pulled over at a vastly disproportionate rate, and that needs to change. And so I think this is a question, and here's what the sheriff's office has been doing for the last, I want to say 20 years, 18, 19, 20 years. Every single stop, every single enforcement stop that we perform, that is, whether it's a vehicle enforcement stop, that's let's say somebody runs a stop sign or a red light, and we initiate an enforcement stop. That stop, we collect data on that stop. And so we have demographics. We look at the demographics of the people that our staff are stopping, right? We have not published that information. I know that was a question that somebody else had asked, but that data is there for us to analyze to see if, in fact, we're targeting a certain demographic. The training on bias-based policing, procedural justice, implicit bias training is something that we've taken seriously in the last 5 years. Every member of our organization has taken bias-based policing, procedural justice, implicit bias training, and other type training. I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but just to kind of give a quick overview of our procedural justice training. Procedural justice is essentially telling people why you're doing what you're doing. I'll give you an example. If you go back about, again, 20 years, let's say we were investigating a residential burglary. And so you would see 2 or 3 deputies out in front of this house. Well, inevitably, you'd have neighbors that would come up and say, hi deputies, can you tell me what's happening here? Should we be afraid? And so our typical response would be, there's no danger to the community, you're okay, we'll contact you if we need to get some information. We've evolved since. And so now our direction is, it's okay to tell people why you're there. It's okay to say that this home had been burgled. It's okay. Let's talk more, not put people in the dark. People want to know what's going on. And it's okay for us to tell you what's going on. Of course, there are going to be incidents where we just can't tell you because of the type of an investigation, whether it's some legal preventions that we can't, that really prevent us from talking. And that certainly is a case on certain types of cases, such as sexual assault, domestic violence. There are certain things that we just can't disclose. However, by and large, most of what we do, we certainly can disclose. And so procedural justice is essentially telling people what we're doing, why we're doing it, hearing people out, trying to get perspective on what's happening. And so to answer your question, we definitely look at demographics. We recognize that training is something that really can't get enough of. And so we're actively looking at what else we can do to prevent or at least mitigate any kind of unfair treatment. Next email that we received is from Peter. And Peter is asking, what changes are planned for policing in Cupertino to limit the use of force? How can we make sure that deadly force will never be used by police in Cupertino? And what are we doing to mitigate police discrimination against minorities, especially Black people? So I'll take each question one at a time. What changes are planned for policing in Cupertino to limit the use of force? Every time a deputy uses force, it's documented. There's a very specific system we use. It's called Blue Team. And so every time we use force, the deputy using force and any witnessing deputies are required to give a report, or an oral report at the scene to the supervisor, and then document the incident through this Blue Team system we have. Once the deputies document the incident, it gets routed to their supervisor. Their supervisor then reviews everything that's been written, including looking at their body-worn camera footage, which incidentally, I have one here. It's a body-worn camera. You can see all the deputies carrying these. So we review the video, any video, and then we look at whether or not the use of force was within our policies, procedures. And if not, then what happened? And so we start to make determinations based on everything we have in terms of if this is something that we need to address, it goes to internal affairs. There's a review process. But if it's something that unfortunately the deputy had to use force and therefore it's not a policy violation or procedural violation, then it gets routed to the lieutenant, who does the same thing, essentially reads everything, reviews the video, and then sends it to me. Once I receive it, I do the same thing, and then we send it to internal affairs. So there's a very, very specific way that we actually look at all these use of force incidents. And if there is any question during that process of whether or not the force used was inappropriate, then we pull that offline and we start looking into it more. How can we make sure that deadly force will never be used by police in Cupertino? Well, we train extensively on this. I can tell you on behalf of all the men and women here at the Sheriff's Office, we never want to use deadly force. Deadly force is something that we know we may have to use to protect the lives of our residents or ourselves, but it's not something that we think we would ever have to use. So I just want to make that clear that we are not, by no means, looking to use deadly force. And so what we do again is we have a very extensive training division. This division was put together, I want to say, probably about 3 years ago or so. Because we're so large, our organization is so large, we stood up a training division. This division is in charge of training all deputies, whether you work in the custody division or whether you work out here in patrol. And so the training division frequently pushes out information on training classes with the focus on force, obviously. And so we are extensively trained on use of force. We carry a lot of tools, right? And so we train in all the tools to make sure that whatever circumstance we face, we're prepared to handle it at the lowest level possible. And so obviously the lowest level being communication, talking to people, right? Making sure that it doesn't escalate. And so we continue to train on those philosophies. What are we doing to mitigate police discrimination against minorities, especially Black people? If there is any discrimination against any minority, we want to know, we want to hear it. Again, I had mentioned how we aggregate data every stop, whether it's a vehicle stop, a pedestrian stop that's getting out, talking to somebody that's walking, maybe somebody jaywalked. All that data is collected, and so we can look at that to see if there are some areas of improvement there. Okay, the next question comes from Connie. I think Connie asked a couple of questions here. Okay, so Connie is asking, she says, state law passed in 2019 requires opening of records of serious police misconduct. How many records has the Sheriff's Office released? SB 1421, effective January 1st, 2019, requires disclosure of records on police discharge of firearms, the use of major force, sexual assault, and dishonesty. How many reports have been made? She also says, question number 2, invest in communities, for example, put community service officers in the right jobs, fund them for 24-hour days, rather than having police officers perform their duties, and when the community service officers leave their shifts. Question number 3, does the Sheriff's Office charge fees for responding to such requests for information, for example, for editing videos from their video cameras? So thank you for your questions, Connie. I'll answer the first question. SB 1421, effective January 1st, requires disclosure of records on police discharge of firearms, use of major force, sexual assault, and dishonesty. How many reports have been made? And so I was able to contact our attorneys, and it appears that we've released 7 under the SB 1421 law. Let me see if I can get that information here. So we did release 7 to the media and people that requested the information. I can tell you that there are many others that we're reviewing, but it is an extensive process because we do have to redact certain information. And so we want to make sure that we get the information to the people that are asking for it. And just to kind of explain a little bit more about SB 1421, SB 1421 became law in the documents here. In 2019, it essentially amended Government Code 832.7. And what it did, it required the disclosure of records and information related to certain high-profile categories, as Connie had mentioned. Categories such as officer misconduct, officer-involved shootings, certain uses of force, sustained findings of sexual assault, and sustained findings of certain types of dishonesty. So 1421 essentially says that a law enforcement agency must release those records. And so any member of the public who wishes to get information, there is a process. It's under the California Public Records Act. You submit your information, you narrow what you want from the organization, and then we look at those records, work with our attorneys, and then release those that are responsive to your request. Let's see what else we got here. invest in the communities, for example, put community service officers in the right jobs. So I believe what you're saying here is that you feel, Connie, that perhaps other professionals can resolve some of the issues that we get dispatched to, right? And so I agree with you there. And that is, we recognize that we may not be the best in dealing with certain types of calls for service. For example, we are seeing many calls for service related to mental health. And so we recognize that even though we're trained on critical incident types of training, and there's crisis intervention training, and there's a bunch of de-escalation training that we do, we by no means are the professionals. And so what we've done is we work with county mental health. And so in the way that it works is we get dispatched to a call for service, we assess the situation, and then we end up contacting county mental health to come out and provide the services that they do. And again, I think your point there is, can we look at finding a better way to utilize our services? And then the third question is, does the Sheriff's Office charge fees for responding to such requests for information? For example, editing videos from video cameras. And to answer that question, recently, May of this year, there was a decision, National Lawyers Guild versus City of Hayward, and the decision is essentially saying that that we can't charge for the redaction of videos. So we don't charge. However, we do charge a modest fee of 10 cents per page to provide paper copies. Now, if you wanted an electronic report, certainly that's free. Okay. Let's see, I think I have one more. Hi, Peter. I was wondering how the De Anza police are coordinated with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. I know they have their own police force, but do not know how it fits into the scheme of policing in the area. Since there are thousands of people on campus in normal times, it is a significant organization. If there's time, can this question be posed? Yeah, absolutely, Connie. So we have an excellent working relationship with all the jurisdictions around us. And De Anza is such an organization where we collaborate. If there is something that we could help them with, we do. If there's something that they can help us with, we do as well. So there's this ongoing communication and collaboration amongst not only De Anza, but we have West Valley College and all the other jurisdictions such as Sunnyvale, Palo Alto, Los Altos, Los Gatos, so on and so forth. And I do believe that's the last question I have. So if there's more questions coming in, more than happy to answer them.
So I have, there are 17 questions under Q&A, and I'll just go in order of receipt.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is from Richard. To understand the issues residents face, suppose an armed robbery suspect is reported fleeing in a late model vehicle. If reported as Black, what criteria does their average deputy have to meet to justify stopping any Black person in a car? Further, if the suspect is reported as Asian or white, what criteria to stop any such person in the car? So essentially, I think he's talking about racial profiling.
Yeah, and it's a good question. One of the things we know is the more information we get, the higher the probability of us catching the person, right? And so if the information is that we have, a red car with, let's say, an African-American person, and that's all the information we have, we're going to need a little bit more. And again, there's a lot of variables here. It depends on time of the day, location. There's just so many other things that come into play. Where is this car in relation to the location of the robbery? Are deputies familiar with this particular car? There's just a lot of information there that's missing. And so what I would say to our residents is this: if you are a victim of a crime, try to get as much information as you can so that we can try to find the people that are guilty of that crime. The less information we get, the harder it is for us to do our job.
Okay. Question number 2 from the Q&A tab is from Jennifer. Hi, this question is from my children. They would like to know if there's a way to separate out different functions of the police that may not be typical, quote, policing functions, such as support for homeless individuals, mental health care, and other issues. Then there's a follow-up question. Oops, it just got. Second question, does the Santa Clara County Sheriff receive donations of military surplus equipment from federal agency or purchase it otherwise? And then they say, thank you for your willingness to have this forum. It is definitely appreciated.
Absolutely. So we'll take the first question. I think we got 2 questions here.
Yes?
The first question,
if you need it.
Yeah, the first question is, can you give me a little bit more on that again?
Says, they'd like to know if there's a way to separate out the different functions of the police that may not be your typical policing or enforcement function.
Yeah.
Enforcement is my word. Such as support for homeless, mental health care, social work, other issues.
Yeah, and so one of the things we value is how responsive we are as an organization. When residents call for any number of things, we want to be responsive, right? And so I think the question is geared towards I'll give you a great example. We had this situation earlier today where, unfortunately, a dog in the city of Cupertino, a dog ended up biting a neighbor, right? But the dog at the time that we got this call was no longer a danger to the neighbor. And so what are we going to do if we respond to this call? I think the best organization for this type of call would be Animal Control Services, right? And I think most of us would agree. It's an animal control type of call. However, when we contacted Animal Control, our dispatch did, Animal Control said that they would not respond unless it was a very serious bite. And so at that point, we know they're not going to respond. We certainly want to go out and help the residents as much as we can. So we respond. And so the point there is that we understand that there very well may be other organizations that can provide these services a bit better than us. However, we need to have this conversation with them and understand what their limitations are, because what we quickly realize is a lot of organizations will not respond in a timely manner, right? And so perhaps Animal Control will respond tomorrow. And as a resident, I know that if I call for assistance, I want assistance today, like now. I don't want it tomorrow. And so when we find ourselves responding to a variety of calls and essentially being the broker of information, because when we respond to these calls, we're assessing what's happening, what's going on, how we can help. And it doesn't mean that we're going to provide that expertise, but it means that since we have a good understanding, now we can reach out to other organizations such as Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services, maybe the fire department, maybe the dog animal control services. And so there are all these other organizations that we work with that we can summon when needed. And so your point is, are there other things that perhaps other people can do so that law enforcement is essentially enforcing laws, right? And again, I think this is kind of the defund the police movement. And I think that if we come together, talk about these kinds of calls, talk about how our service can be complemented by having experts in these certain fields come out with us, absolutely open to that type of discussion, for sure. Now, the second part of the question was this 1033 program. And so the 1033 program, for those of you that are not aware, is a federal program where law enforcement organizations can receive military surplus, right? Things that the military does not need anymore. And so throughout the last 10 years, we have received 3 things from the 1033 program. One is a Jeep, it's a Humvee. It is a passenger vehicle Humvee, it's camoed out. We use this vehicle at the range, exclusively at the range. It doesn't leave the range. Matter of fact, I saw it on Friday. and I was at the range, and it's used to move items at the range. It doesn't leave the range. Two was scopes for some rifles that our SWAT team uses. These scopes that we received, extremely outdated. The military didn't want them, and so we were able to receive them, and unfortunately, we haven't used them. So we're right in a process of giving them back to the program because, again, these are outdated pieces of equipment that really don't help us. And then the third thing we received was essentially like a big blanket, right? So if you've ever seen any military type movies, typically MASH comes to mind for those of you that remember the show MASH. And it's this big blanket that has camo, and it's essentially used to cover equipment so that if you're looking from the sky at a wooded area, you know, it kind of blends in. And so it's essentially a big blanket. So those are the only three things we've received from the 1033 program.
Okay, great. Next question is from Sean. Law enforcement agencies are not required to educate its members on how to interact with disabled individuals, even though it is government research that shows that the majority of incarcerated people of color have a disability. The ability to speak is the metric that law enforcement uses to measure intelligence, and if someone does not respond exactly and as quickly as expected, there are consequences. People of color on the autism spectrum or who are deaf and those who may live with a mental illness are paying an even higher price for their disability. How will the West Valley Patrol meet its responsibility to work with experts from the disabled community and educate its members on how to better improve interaction with disabled individuals?
We certainly welcome any member of our community that can provide us any kind of education on a variety of topics. This certainly is a topic that we have been trained on. There is a requirement for all peace officers in the state of California to receive 24 hours of training every 2 years, right? And so although you think, okay, 24 hours every 2 years, that's not a lot of time, we would agree. And so there's a lot more that we get trained on. And 24 hours really is the minimum. And so we have had, and we do have ongoing training related to these topics. And to be more specific, the de-escalation of people that are suffering from a mental health issue. And I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, and that is that we respond to just about every call for service, assess the situation, and then bring in the experts. And so even if we respond to somebody who's having a mental health issue, we recognize that there's a mental health issue here. And so our training does not require us to force an issue, right? One of the things we know is the more time we put between the incident, the more options we have. And so the training that we have is based on time, giving it time, trying to have a conversation, using force, again, as a last resort. It's not something we use frequently, but certainly is something that we have to use to protect ourselves and others. So if there is an organization that is willing to come talk to us about things that they're experiencing, things that they know, perhaps they're subject matter experts, we would be more than happy to allocate some time to be able to hear and understand how we can do our job better.
Okay, let's see here. The next question is from Mega. Can you give an overview of the Sheriff's Office's budget, especially in regards to the West Valley Division? How much funding do you receive from the city of Cupertino? What ways, amounts is it spent?
Do you want to try to answer that, Deb, or
Well, I can't tell you how it's necessarily spent in any detail, but I can pull up the top level dollars to try and answer that. So in this fiscal year, we send over approximately $14 million. But the sheet I am looking at is for fiscal year 21, 22, And the bottom line is about 15 million for. And it splits up between large categories, which you may need to speak to a little bit more, Captain Urena. General law enforcement, traffic enforcement days, and split, and nights are separate, but nothing's in there. Investigative hours, reserve activity hours, projected special services, schools resource officer, and those are the major breakouts.
Yeah, so to answer the question, if you look at your traditional police department, you would think of things like a building, a car, employees, bargaining agreements with the unions, motorcycles, gas. There's a lot that goes in to managing a police department, to having a police department. And so the categories mentioned there by our city manager really breaks down some of that information. And so, for example, the first category she mentioned was general patrol. What that is, it's an allocation of how many hours we spend patrolling the city of Cupertino. And so I don't have the number in front of me, but we are allocated X amount of hours, so that our staff can patrol the city. And that also includes calls for service related to anything that happens in the city. Motor hours, that's I think it's categories traffic enforcement. That speaks to our deputies that are on motorcycles that I'm sure many residents have seen. That is a specific category. I think all residents would agree. We have a small traffic problem in the city. Maybe not right now, but we do. And so that budget, that area, speaks to the amount of hours, again, this is all based on hours, that is allocated for the deputies that are performing those traffic duties. And I'm sure you frequently see them in and around the school, right? And then if you go further down, you'll see investigative hours, I believe, is another category. And we do have detectives here that work at the West Valley Patrol Division. And these detectives here are primarily focused on property crimes. One of the things we know is the city of Cupertino, like many other cities in this part of the county, we do have property crime as our number one type of crime. And so throughout the years, certainly before my time, there was an agreement that deputies would be working here on property crimes that occur in the city of Cupertino. And so again, we have an allocation of hours for those deputies to work on Cupertino specific type of calls. And so it's broken down in those fashions. The last one I think is a school resource officer. And we do have 2 school resource officers that work in the city of Cupertino. They essentially complement each other. So we have the Fremont Unified, and then we also have Cupertino Unified. And so they provide services to the high schools and middle and elementary schools. And so the budget is structured in that fashion.
Thank you. The next question is from Crystal. What proactive actions is the city and police department taking to make Black people feel safer in their homes and in our schools? For example, in 2017, there was a kill list threatening Black students' lives, but no concrete action was taken and there was no transparency afforded to the parents and families.
I'm not sure exactly what that incident speaks to, but my guess is it's probably an incident that happened at one of our high schools where a student was singled out for being African American. I can tell you without getting into too many of the details, because we're talking about juveniles and there are certain laws that prevent me from talking about juveniles, but I can tell you that that particular incident was investigated thoroughly by our detectives. Several search warrants were authored on that case. We spent over 400 hours investigating the allegations. We interviewed over 40 people. We really wanted to understand who said what, and really get down to the facts. And so it took us a long time because there were a lot of interviews. And then once we finished our investigation, we sent it to the district attorney, who ultimately has the authority to file charges or not. And so our role in law enforcement is to gather as many facts as we can, put it on paper, and then send it to the district attorney for prosecution. In addition to that, I personally, again, if it's the same case, I personally met with the school administration on this, and we discussed a few things that we could have. Again, you know, I'm not going to speak for the district, but there are certain things that I brought up that I thought would be good, and I'll let the school district talk about that. But to the question specifically, you know, there was a lot that we did to really understand what the issues were here. And as much as we tried to communicate with the parents and the young lady, there were some challenges there.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Anu. How can we access demographic data related to procedural justice and all forms of law enforcement in Cupertino?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit there.
Oh, sorry about that. How can we access demographic data to procedural justice and all forms of law enforcement in Cupertino?
Yeah, so anytime you have a resident has a question about data, if the resident is inclined to submit a California Public Records Act request, that'd be the best way to do it. And so you can go online, you'll see under records how you can request such information. And again, we do work with our attorneys on this to make sure that we don't violate any laws. You know, in law enforcement, we don't actually make laws, we just enforce them and we follow them. So I would ask the resident or any resident to submit the request as stated online, Sheriff's Office website.
Great. Okay, next question is from Mega. Out of the 8 policies recommended by Campaign Zero to limit use of force, Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office has only adopted 1. And in parentheses, evidence for this is here, and she lists the Santa Clara County, looks like a website. Will the department commit to implementing the rest of these data-backed policies?
I think she's referencing the 8 Can't Wait campaign, is that?
I believe so too.
Yeah, I could certainly talk about this a little bit here. So the 8 Can't Wait campaign focuses on 8 topics, and they're really geared towards use of force. And so I'll go over each one. First one was to ban chokeholds and strangleholds. And so although we've never had chokeholds as part of our use of force continuum, we did have what we call a carotid restraint. The carotid restraint was removed last week or the week before from our use of force continuum. Sheriff Smith saw the need to take quick action on this. We worked with our union partners. One of the things we know is we don't want to change policies, procedures, unless we're all coming to the table discussing how we can move forward and make these changes. And so the sheriff looked at the carotid restraint, which is, again, it used to be one of our force options in our continuum use of force, and that was removed. Required de-escalation is the second topic that I'm looking at here. And this says de-escalation and interpersonal communication training, including methods that use time, distance, and cover and concealment to avoid escalating situations, has been in our policy and has continued to be trained on by deputies. So we require de-escalation. It's something that's been in our policy ever since I've been here. It hasn't changed. The third one is require warning before shooting. Again, that's something that is explicit in our policy. We do require a warning shot whenever feasible, understanding that some things happen very quickly. And so to the extent that we can give a warning, we do give a warning. And so that's in our policy. The fourth point that I'm looking at says exhaust all alternatives before shooting. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the use of deadly force is something that we never want to do. We never want to engage in. And so we train extensively on how can we mitigate a shooting? How can we mitigate a situation where we have to use deadly force? And this is something that probably every other day we talk about in our briefings. How can we deal with the situation where somebody's coming at us with the car, for example, right? And this has happened. And so we discuss things like, well, get out of the way, get the license plate, that kind of information. We have certain tools like spike strips that we can deploy to slow the vehicle. And so we've had this in our policy as well, exhaust all alternatives before shooting. Number 4 is duty to intervene. Duty to intervene when force is being used that we feel is unreasonable given the circumstances. And so again, in Mr. George Floyd's incident, officers should have intervened. And we have it in our policy that we shall intervene. And that is something that we ingrain in our staff from that first day at the academy. You are trusted to do your job. The powers that you have come from the community. Doesn't matter who's committing the crime. And so if you see a partner that's doing something that is unreasonable, they have a duty to intervene. And so that's in our policy. Ban shooting at moving vehicles. Again, that's been in our policy, not to shoot at moving vehicles. Again, of course, there's going to be circumstances where shooting at a vehicle is the most appropriate thing to do. Again, you got to take all these circumstances separate because you're never going to see two incidents exactly the same. And so we have this information on our policies. And the 7th one is require use of force continuum. We have a use of force continuum. I know there's some organizations that have more of like, it's just kind of like a circle and you could use this option or that option. We actually have a continuum that starts with us being there. Our presence, for example, is the first thing that is on that list. The last thing we have is required comprehensive reporting. And again, this is the context of using force, right? Again, as I mentioned earlier, we have this blue team system that really captures a lot of information, a lot of data, and it's extensive in terms of all the reporting and boxes you have to check, and the reviewing process is extensive. And so those are the 8. Most of these do speak to our use of force policy. And so I would encourage residents to go to our website and go under SO policies and procedures and feel free to read the use of force policy that outlines just about every one of these points here.
Okay, the next question is from Pat, but I believe you've answered it already. So does the sheriff's office use military type equipment? And you've mentioned not very much, and you're sending some back. So the next question is from Anita. Currently, what kinds of anti-racist training does the Extensive Training Division employ in order to minimize implicit racial bias among officers?
Yeah, we as I had mentioned before, this is an area that we continue to evaluate. Again, we know that we need more training as an organization. I don't think there could be enough training really on the various things that we do. The trust that's put into every deputy is very, very large. It's huge because that comes from the public. And so we recognize there's other training opportunities out there that we can utilize. And so what we're doing is as we speak, we are evaluating those courses and then coming up with how we can receive more of this type of training. Under the leadership of Sarah Smith and the Board of Supervisors, there's been a lot of recent in the last few years type training, ethics training, for example, bias-based training, implicit training. There's a lot of training that's been adopted in the last few years. make no mistake, we recognize that we need more training to be able to understand different perspectives. And so although I do believe we do a good job with our training in terms of exposing our staff to different scenarios and how do we mitigate any force and what should we be looking at? How do we deal with this without singling out any one particular type of race? We look at that. And so that's something that continues to be an ongoing project for our training division.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from an anonymous person. What can be done to help Neighborhood Watch program and assist the police with the break-ins, all the break-ins?
What can be done by the Neighborhood Watch program?
And assist the police with all the break-ins?
Yeah. So the Neighborhood Watch program is a program that is extremely important to the city of Cupertino. It is a program that has been managed extremely well by Stephanie Turini, and the Block Leader program is the other one by Laura Lee. These programs, they're a godsend because we have so many committed residents working together alongside our organization to try to eliminate crime in the city. And so, my hat goes off to them. These are volunteers that have dedicated themselves. And so anything that we can do to complement them, of course, we're going to do. I think I would say just about every Neighborhood Watch person and block leader probably is familiar with my philosophy of communicating as much information as I can, letting them know what's going on. So what I would say is for our Neighborhood Watch leaders, what we need, and that is we need your eyes and ears out there. If you see something out there, please give us a call, carry our message of see something, say something. I think it's a great program, and I look forward to someday being able to get together again as a group to talk about some of these things that are occurring recently. We have seen a small increase in commercial burglaries, but not residential burglaries. So what I would say is please call us anytime you see anything that's out of the ordinary in your neighborhood.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Lisa. What percentage of the county's deputies have CIT training? And if the answer, she actually has two, so I'm going to blend them together. And if the answer is not 100%, is there a goal and a time frame for getting to 100% of the force trained in CIT?
Yeah, I would say about 90% or so of the deputies are trained in CIT. And our goal obviously is 100%. I can tell you that every deputy that's coming out of the academy is trained on CIT. It is a commitment. It is 40 hours. It's a week-long program. And so we need to make sure that when deputies are taking this course that, we have enough coverage in the city. And so I know our city manager, Feng, and I have been working on finding a location in the city of Cupertino so that we can bring a large group of deputies that need this training. But, with the COVID-19 challenges, it's been difficult, but the collaboration that the Sheriff's Office has with the city of Cupertino is definitely something that has helped us meet our training requirements. And so I hope that within the next couple of months, I can come back and say 100% of our staff. That's something we're working on.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Kathy. Some cities are promoting to eliminate SROs at the schools. What is the position of West Valley for Cupertino?
Yeah, so school resource officers. Our school resource officers do work in schools, but they are not enforcement geared. In other words, their mission is not to go into the schools and to look for crime. Certainly if there's a crime or a public safety issue, they will certainly address that. But they're not there to try to uncover, this big crime wave of anything. They are there to be a counselor to the students, to build relationships, with students, to build relationships with staff, with teachers, with the principal, with the district. And so the model that we have is that our 2 school resource officers are there to build relationships and not necessarily take people to jail. And so if we have a situation where the school resource officer has to intervene, then we call a deputy from patrol to come in. That way the school resource officers can really step back and allow the patrol officer to handle that incident. And we feel that's the best approach. Again, we want to build a relationship with our students. We want them to trust us. And so we want to help them with whatever questions they may have. There are a lot of things that come up in high school, as many of you know. And so having somebody that you can talk to, it doesn't necessarily have to be about crime. It can be about career, whether it's this job, an attorney, whatever other organizations we work with. Just having someone there, I think goes a long way. So our model is essentially deputies that are in the class, in the schools, being mentors to our young adults. And of course, if something happens, God forbid, but if something happens in terms of an active incident, active shooter, they would be the first ones to try to stop anybody from getting injured. And so that's kind of our philosophy with school resource officers, is they're not there to enforce the laws. They're really there to provide that type of training. That type of relationship with our students. And I can give you an overview of what we did last year here from the school resource officer's perspective. And so last year we had 22 presentations at the high schools, and that included about 2,100 students. The presentations were on digital media, safety, run, hide, defend, followed by 4 run, hide, defend drills. And again, these are the roles and responsibilities of our school resource officers. In the elementary and middle schools, we had approximately 108 presentations to about 7,400 students. The presentations included stranger danger to kids that are K through 2nd, bike safety, bullying respect, stranger danger, and internet safety to 3rd to 5th graders. They also provided 10 presentations to about 300 staff members on run, hide, defend, followed by 12 run, hide, defend drills. And so as you can see there's a lot of stuff that they do that's not related to enforcement. In addition to that, we did have one of our school resource officers provide a ride to school with the cop prize to 2 students who placed 3rd in a walkathon, right? And so this is basically where the school resource officer picked up a student and then drove them to school with the nice lights and siren. Again, building that relationship. And then lastly, the school resource officers do facilitate a holiday party at Moffett Field. We've been doing this for the last 10 years. And so what they do is they go out there and they feed people. Santa Claus shows up. They give gifts to the children of the military families that are at Moffett Field that would otherwise not have an opportunity to celebrate a holiday. And so they're in charge of that. And so that kind of gives you an overview of what our school resource officers do. They're not necessarily at the schools to enforce the laws. They're there to build relationships.
So since we're on the topic of SROs, I'm going to take one question out of order. It's from Mimi. How many times has the sheriff had to respond to racial or hate crimes at our local schools, K through 12 community college? Racism is a learned behavior. Empathy and compassion are also learned behaviors. My point is that if the number is increasing, then time and funds need to be redirected to intervene at the schools for our children's future to be good citizens.
I don't think they were increasing, but I can't talk about that because I'd have to look at the statistics on it. But just to backtrack, every shift, there's a supervisor on duty. Every supervisor documents what happens on that shift. And so every day, I look at what happens at our schools, in our city, and I do a little research to understand what's happening in the community. And I have not seen an increase in these types of crimes in our schools. Obviously, school's been out since March because of COVID-19. But prior to that, I don't recall an increase in those types of crimes.
Okay, I'm going back to the top of the order from an anonymous person. Again, in this scorecard, it is shown that there is disproportionate amount of arrests / violence against Latinas, Latinos, or Latin individuals in Cupertino. What are you doing to fix this? And then they cite some scorecard that's posted at the sheriff's website, looks like.
I'm not aware of an increase or the statistics on Hispanics being victimized in Cupertino. So I can't speak to that. So I'd have to come back to that question because I'm not aware of an increase.
Yeah, they give a website, https policescorecard.org, and then / sheriff equals Santa Clara.
Okay.
Just a little, yeah.
Yeah, but Deb, I think that's for the whole county of Santa Clara.
Oh, okay. Okay. Gotcha. Oh, that might be the stat. You're right. Okay. Again, from an anonymous attendee, what changes have you seen for calls since the COVID-19 pandemic started? You mentioned mental health. Can you characterize these calls? Are you having an increase in overdoses, for example?
Yeah, so the calls we're seeing as it relate to COVID-19, obviously, many residents are sheltering in place. And so what's happening is we're seeing calls related to domestic disturbances, right? So, you have X amount of people inside a home for so long, people start to not get along. And so we have seen a small increase on that. Not to the point where the issues are criminal in nature, just to the point where they're calling us because they want us to essentially intervene, mitigate the situation so it doesn't escalate. And that's really our role. And our role is to make sure that we arrive, we maintain the peace as peace officers, but more importantly, to provide those resources. And so we're able to provide on-the-spot resources to residents that are going through one of many issues because of COVID-19. And so I would say that calls for service related to just domestic incidents are on the rise. Mental health issues definitely have been on the rise. I want to say last week we had an incident where we had a gentleman that was clearly he had a mental health issue, and we're trying to get him help in Cupertino, and we were called to help him 3 times. The first time we went out to talk to him, it's hard to communicate with him. He was mobile, he was walking, he was in the roadway, and so we thought we were in a good spot, but then we got another call and then another call. So mental health type calls, domestic disturbances type calls are calls we're seeing an increase of. And so what we're doing is, again, we're brokering the issue, providing resources, getting other organizations involved as needed.
Okay, next question, also anonymous. In this COVID-19 situation, we try very hard to stay safe while outside as part of our work or buying groceries and such. While waiting in a queue in a public space, we encounter situations where people deliberately do not maintain social distance, either walk or stand next to you alone or in groups. What is the best way to deal with such situations without saying anything that might escalate the situation?
Yeah, I mean, the recommendation there is to obviously create distance, right? You want at least a 6-foot distance. To the extent that you can do that. I don't see a problem in being polite and asking someone to don a face covering or to please keep the 6 feet distance in a polite way. However, I understand sometimes it's better not to have a conversation with someone. So what I would say is definitely take it upon yourself to create that distance so that it doesn't escalate.
Okay, next question is from Claudia. Why is race used as a proxy for identifying, quote, suspects to begin with? I'm a mixed race individual and know firsthand that there is a wide range of phenotypes that correlate with any particular race. This inevitably leads to racial profiling.
Yeah, I think that's just one way to identify someone, much like a person has long hair, short hair, bald, nationality, just to try to narrow down who we should be looking for. So I don't know how else we would describe someone, again, in the context of looking for a suspect. If you don't have nationality, you would say somebody who has long hair and wearing this type of clothing. Yeah, I think it'd be difficult to try to find someone without the nationality. But the point's made.
Another question from Claudia. How did the Sheriff's Department only, lost track of that. How did the Sheriff's Department only start a training program 3 years ago? Why was there no training program before?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I must have not clarified that. So we've always had a training and personnel division. And it was essentially a division that included our personnel division and training. So it was essentially a 2-department division, if you will. And so we split that, we bifurcated that and created a training division specific to deal with training matters. And then we have now our personnel division that deals with nothing but personnel matters. And so we've always had a training division. That is people that are, this is their job, what they do. Their assignment is to train others, to provide opportunities for our staff, to go out and get training outside the confines of this organization. Having spent about 2 years myself in that division, I spent 2 years training recruits at the academy. I can tell you that it is a very robust division that is always looking for opportunities to get information so that they can share it with the organization. Yeah.
Great. Next question is also anonymous. Would the 2011 quarry shooter who was African American have been treated differently today? Please remind viewers of the case.
Yeah, so in 2011, we had an incident at the quarry up here. And essentially, a suspect came in and it was an active shooter scenario. And so he did end up killing some coworkers. At the time, we didn't know where he had ran off to. And so this was early in 2011. And so we were looking for someone who fit a certain profile based on what the employees told us. And it was a few days later that we ended up finding him. And it was a shootout in Sunnyvale where he ended up taking his own life. And so in that particular situation, we wanted to know as much as we could about who we were dealing with, because we knew that this person had already killed somebody, a few people. I believe it was 2 or 3. I apologize, I don't have an exact number. And so, of course, we want as much information as we can because we didn't want our residents to get hurt. Yeah.
Okay. The next thing is just a statement, which I'll read because it's nice. I'd read bad statements too, but hi, Captain. Just wanted to say thank you for the service the men and women of the Sheriff's Department perform in our neighborhoods. We are fortunate to have your service. The next question is from Anita. What procedures are in place to reprimand or let go of officers who commit misdemeanors or misuse their power?
Mm-hmm. So any allegation of wrongdoing by deputies is investigated thoroughly. I just want to make that clear. Any allegation that is made is investigated thoroughly. It doesn't matter what it is. whether it's somebody was rude or somebody committed a crime, they are all investigated. And so the process we have in place for somebody who commits a crime, let's say, is if somebody feels comfortable letting me know, I will get the information and then it gets turned over to our internal affairs division. Now, I don't have to know. You can certainly go directly to our internal affairs division where a lieutenant oversees all these investigations. And so if you go on our website, you can find that information. But essentially, the internal affairs folks will look at everything. They will get reports from agencies. They will conduct interviews, and then they will come up with their findings. Once they determine the findings based on facts, all the investigative process that goes into this, interviews, you name it, then it gets turned over to a committee that looks at the discipline, the proper discipline for whatever act was committed by the deputy, to include termination, suspension, a letter of reprimand, whatever the case may be. So we do, again, every single allegation is investigated thoroughly. And so we have this internal affairs division that really deals with deputies that commit crime. And so I would point you towards our webpage.
Great, next question. Thanks, Jennifer, for the question on separating functions of the police, such as support for homeless individuals, mental health, et cetera. I did not discern, and this is also anonymous, I did not discern a clear path or method for separating these functions and possibly deferring to health and social services rather than criminalization for such issues. Could you please elaborate on whether there is a clear path for action on this?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is homelessness is not a crime. We don't treat homelessness as a crime. And what we do, again, is we try to help the folks that need assistance. This mentality that we're warriors, that left about 20 years ago. We are guardians. We're looked at as guardians. We feel like we're guardians. And so when we see folks that are homeless, our gut instinct is, how can we help them? And so every time we get dispatched to a homeless person, an encampment, we discuss options for them. We tell them where there's a location where they can find services. In this area, we point them a lot towards West Valley Community Services. But there are a lot of services out there that people can certainly seek. And so she's right in that we don't, we're probably not the best suited to deal with homeless individuals. However, we do provide them with resources. And so I've had the opportunity personally to work with other organizations where they came out to a location in Cupertino and they were able to, on the spot, give them resources. And this was a family. Now, unfortunately, we can't make people solicit these services. We can simply recommend that they go to certain locations. But at the end of the day, they have to make those decisions. And what we've seen is, even though we give them a lot of recommendations, we do put them in contact with other organizations, decisions made often not to accept those offers.
Okay, thank you for that. Anonymous, what proportion of the money listed in the budget goes to each overarching, oh wait, I skipped one from Judy. Thank you so much for offering this forum. We live in a really great city and I appreciate you making this available.
Thank you.
Next is Anonymous. What proportion of the money listed in the budget goes to each overarching division? Do you want me to try and look at that from my?
So I think the question is money allocated for the different units within division, right?
Maybe.
So how much is allocated for, let's say, traffic enforcement? Yeah, I think you have those.
Yeah, let me see if I can pull this up. Okay, so for the 2021 to 22 fiscal year, let's see, general law enforcement, and I'm just going to round these off. So approximately 10 million. So that's the bulk of it, it looks like. Traffic enforcement, 2 million. investigative hours or investigative unit, 1.7 million. Let's see, reserve activity hours, about 100,000. Operating the substation is about 250K, 55K, sorry. And then, let's see, special services, I'm sorry, SROs or school resource officers is about 560K. And that should total roughly to the 15.5 million I was talking about. It's a rough breakout.
Yeah, I do want to add that if you compare the law enforcement budget from the various cities in the county, you will see that the city of Cupertino has done a fantastic job of managing those costs. And I would say that the city is the lowest, if not the second lowest, in terms of budget, in terms of budgeting for law enforcement services. And so this is an ongoing dialogue that the sheriff's office has had with the city, and we're here to help the city. If the city needs to reduce cost, we can certainly talk about that. If they want to increase costs, we can talk about that. But we have a service model where we're able to communicate this every year.
Okay, next question is from Anu. What is the demographic composition of the members of the police in the West Valley Division which works in Cupertino?
So we currently have 83 staff members here in the substation. 1.2 African American, 2.4 Filipino, 31% Hispanic, 12% Asian, 42% white, Caucasian, and 6% multi-race.
Thank you. Do you have any of those demographics posted to your website?
I do not.
Okay, next
Good
question,
idea.
also anonymous. Does the sheriff or city pay rent for the substation at Main Street or other substations on private property?
So we actually have a really good working relationship with our communities. As I mentioned before, we've been part of this community since the city was incorporated. And throughout all those years, we've built these relationships where we're able to help each other in accomplishing our goals. And so we don't pay for any other building or location other than this substation that's located on De Anza.
Okay. Next question. It's kind of the same on the budgets from an anonymous, so we'll skip it. And I've been corrected. I've kept saying the next fiscal year. I skipped the one in this year because I didn't have the numbers in front of me. So sorry about that to folks. Let's see here. Next question is, what relationship, this is a question from Anita. What relationship do police officers in Cupertino and Santa Clara County have with police unions? How are unions involved with the reemployment of previously discharged officers?
Well, much like any organization, we do have a Deputy Sheriff's Association here in the Sheriff's Office. And so we collaborate on a lot of things. Certainly, we can't impose certain things on our staff if they don't have input or feel like we're changing the working conditions or maybe something's unsafe. And so it's an ongoing collaboration that we have with them to make sure that, much like what we're doing here, and I'm taking notes, by the way, and that is to hear their concerns, to try to address their concerns, and to get to a place where we're able to accomplish management's goals as well as the deputy's goals. And so it's an ongoing relationship that continues to evolve into a really good organization where we're able to work with each other to accomplish what we want. Yeah.
Okay, the next one is also from someone anonymous. It's more of a question/comment. Could we get our elected official, Lori Smith, at a meeting in live communication format? forum is not an adequate response by the city. Citizens want to talk directly to our elected officials and hold them accountable orally, and we should have the right to do so. So I assume you're just going to take note that perhaps that request has been made.
Absolutely.
We're running out of time, so I will see if I can click through some of these quite quickly. This next one is from Sashi. There are a number of cameras that are mounted on traffic lights, but it seems neither the city nor the Santa Clara Sheriff's Department monitor them. Is my understanding correct? If so, how can we change this? If not, how do we get access to this footage if a need arises?
I think that would be a question for Public Works.
Yeah, I'll probably take that in. It's mostly for traffic monitoring. From what you have shared, I understand that you store all reports of incidents for analysis. Has anyone done any such analysis? If not, why not? And if so, where are the results?
I presume the residents referencing our demographic data.
I assume so. I can't tell.
Yeah. So again, that's something we're looking at. We have not published anything like that, but we do collect the data, and so we're looking at that data and see what it looks like to see what we need to do to improve our office.
She says, I'm going to repeat this portion. I understand that you store all reports of incidents for analysis. Has anyone done such an analysis? Maybe it's to collect what the analyses say.
I don't know the answer to that. I know we report a lot of information to the Department of Justice, and so they may have some of this information online.
Okay, you say we can get information on procedural justice as a resident, sorry. Once we get this information, can we share it publicly or on social media, for example?
Yeah, we are a public organization, and so records that we create, of course, there's a process for it, but records that we create are subject to disclosure. And so once we disclose those records to a resident, it's at that point, it's a matter of public record, and they can share it.
Okay, and then this is from Clinton. What are the administrative or legal consequences for officers who violate the use of force or failure to act policies?
Termination is potentially the outcome. Again, it depends on the incident. It depends on what happened, how the deputy failed to intervene. But it could be as severe as termination. It could be a letter of reprimand. There's a wide range of discipline that goes into these types of incidents.
Okay. Next question is from Mega. This is a follow-up to the 8 can't wait question. To address many of them, the policy is about a ban on chokeholds, not inclusion in the continuum. Can you commit to a ban? Is there a legal requirement to exhaust alternatives before shooting, not just discussion in your meetings? I'm going to read you the series. Is it legally required for officers to intervene to stop another officer using excessive force? An actual ban on shooting at moving vehicles. Are officers legally required to report when they point a firearm at a civilian? There's a difference between recommendations, discussions, and bans requirements. Please point us to whether and where these are codified.
Yeah, so I think the point there is in our 8 can't wait, we do outline things that should occur, right, based on our policies. And so I just want to make it clear that these are our policies. And so if anytime a deputy falls outside these policies, the boundaries of these policies, there is discipline there. Now, in terms of criminal discipline, that's completely separate. So we have to look at the incident. Mr. George Floyd, I think, is a great example where somebody should have helped Mr. Floyd, and failure to help under those circumstances rose to the level of a criminal act. And so I can't explain all the types of incidents other than to say that it could very well lead to termination, suspension, criminal charges, a letter of reprimand. It really depends on what is happening. And the investigation will paint that picture well once completed.
Okay, we got 3 minutes, so here's what I'm going to do. The next question is kind of part of it is a repeat on the ethnicities or demographics of your department. How many officers speak a second language? And how does that compare to the demographics of the people stopped or arrested? Do you do any of that kind of analysis?
Yo hablo español, poquito.
Yeah.
I don't have that data. I apologize.
Okay. If officers are at schools to build relationships and act as counselors, why not hire an actual counselor instead of a police officer?
Yeah, I think that speaks again to what we're trying to accomplish. President Obama's 21st century policing really pointed towards building relationships. This isn't a report that was published in 2016, I want to say, 15?
15.
And it made it clear that we need to establish relationships. And so being able to be on school grounds, talking with students, giving students these presentations, I think it helps in the long run, because we know that our youth are going to be running our country in the future. And so we certainly want to, build that relationship with them and get them to understand that we're here really as a guardian and not as a warrior.
And then this is probably close to our last question. And the next couple of ones are on SROs, so that likely will be addressed maybe in a follow-up form in more detail maybe. What kind of counseling, this is anonymous, psychology training do officers receive before being hired to serve as mentors if, as the captain says, they are not there to enforce the law?
Yeah, so there is a significant amount of training that goes on with their school resource officers. They do attend training that's geared towards fostering relationships. Their training is, let me get this here. Their training is really multifaceted. So they go to a Peace Officer Standards and Training course where they're taught a variety of things to include, let me see if I can actually quote it here. I don't have it here. So they learn current trends in school policing. They learn how to collaborate with educators. They learn how to teach as well as how to manage a classroom. They learn gangs, drugs, and laws pertaining to children and child abuse. They also cover investigations. And so, of course, they also learn active shooter type incidents and how they can be involved at the beginning. And so it's an ongoing type of training with them. And again, they're really there to help the school decide what's the best course of action in any number of situations. They're not necessarily there to uncover crime and take kids to jail.
And that is the end. We're at 7:01, and I promised to cut it off, although we're getting some very nice comments as opposed to questions. But we will take those.
Can I give a closing statement?
Yes.
So I just want to say on behalf of Sheriff Smith and all the members of the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, I want to thank the residents for allowing us to be part of your community. We recognize how residents may feel right now with what's going on around our country. And we're here to hear you, to work with you, to see what else we can do to enhance our services. I think this is the time when we have to come together. I've been taking notes here on things that I know we can improve on. I can tell you every deputy here is committed to making sure that our product, that our services are the best. And to that extent, I want to say thank you, City Manager Fang and Honorable Mr. Sharf, for giving me this opportunity to talk to our residents. And I hope to be part of many more of these in the future. Thank you.
Thank everyone for attending. Mr. Mayor, do you have any closing remarks?
Did you want to talk about future forums? I think, or did you mention that already?
I did mention it, but I can mention it again. We are going to be holding another one of these, probably the first week in July. We haven't really locked down a date just yet, but it will be focused on students and teens, and will be in partnership with the schools, the school districts, and hopefully have another healthy discussion like this. It's been really good.
Okay, and also, once the shelter in place is over, I think some coffee talks with the sheriff's captain might be good. I know there was one comment that they want to talk directly to the city officials and I guess to the sheriff about things and not have it go through this kind of moderation, which I understand.
Me
It's
too.
a little difficult with Zoom because of all the incidents of Zoom bombing. And, we want to avoid having people, just get up and give, long speeches. We want to get to the point. So I think that once the COVID-19 shelter in place is over, we can have a forum that would be more acceptable and takes into account those considerations.
Agreed. Lastly, the forum and the Q&A will be posted to the Cupertino.org/solidarity webpage for anybody who wants to go there and take a look at the questions and watch the recording. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.